business or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast, brought to you by Truelytics, the one and only comprehensive advisor transition management platform. This week on the show, I have David Kakish, the CEO of RIA WorkSpace, with me to talk about cybersecurity for RIAs. You know, one of the things that frequently comes up on this show is the fact that RIAs and independent financial advisory firms are small businesses, like really small businesses. Heck, most RIA firms have fewer than 5 employees, and some of the larger ones, they top out around 50 employees. And we're talking, in some cases, yes, billions of dollars of AUM, but that usually only equates to, millions of dollars in the low millions of dollars of revenue. So that's a small business by every measure that we think of, right? So when it comes to investing in cybersecurity solutions, the approach that your business is going to use is almost certainly a lot different than it is for what we consider traditional medium to large size businesses, right? You don't have the budget, you don't have the manpower to handle cybersecurity in the same way as those larger firms. You're going to have to take a different approach. And David and his team at RIA WorkSpace, that's one of the things that they do is they work with RIAs, right? They know your business. So we're gonna be digging deep on, again, cybersecurity, also kind of some of the ideal tech stack solutions you should be thinking about in your business and what does the future hold for tech in this industry. Really, really fascinating stuff. Now, before we get to the conversation with David, please do make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, SoundCloud, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a topic or a guest for the show, please hit us up. Email podcast@truelytics.com or swing by the website and use that little contact form, or you can just hit us up on the socials at Truelytics or at Mike Langford, pretty much everywhere. Really easy to find. Okay, let's get to the conversation with David Kakish. Well, David Kakish, wonderful to have you on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. Welcome to the show, sir.
Mike, great to be with you.
I know, it's so funny. For the background of the people listening, or watching, David and I have become like fast friends. You every once in a while you have somebody on the show, you're like, I could hang out with this dude for an entire weekend and I don't think there would be any like dead air. We just gotta like hang and talk and so forth. So this is gonna be a fantastic show. So I would recommend to our audience, buckle up, grab a beverage. You're in for a wild ride on this one. That's great stuff. So, you're a wonderful guest to have as, one of the first guests for the new year, because I think what happens at the turn of any new year for any business owner, whether they're a solo operator or they're, running a larger business, you start to think about goals, right? You start to think, what do I want to accomplish in the new year and so forth. And one area that is always of interest is technology. And so having you on from RIA WorkSpace, and you do a lot of work, and we're going to get into that in detail, with technology for RIAs. And so one of the things I thought maybe we could kick off with is, just level setting here, right? RIAs are really small businesses. The average RIA firm has fewer than 5 employees. We're talking small businesses. But one of the things that makes it possible for such a small business and a small team to manage hundreds of clients, sometimes thousands of accounts, hundreds of millions, if not some billions of dollars of AUM, is technology, right? Yet there seems to be some randomness in the tech stack. And by the way, I think for some RIAs, tech stack is a term they're not overly familiar with. It's just all the random technology solutions you use, whether it's hardware, software, yada, yada. So there's some randomness, it seems, for RIAs. So I guess maybe let's kick off with you educating the audience, I guess, and me, hopefully, on what are some of the core components of an ideal tech stack for the modern RIA firm in your view?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike, I'm glad we actually finally hit record, because we could be chit-chatting forever before we hit record, and so I'm glad we finally hit record. And I want to welcome the listener again. My name is David Kakish, president of RIA WorkSpace. We work with RIAs and financial advisors nationwide. We provide cloud managed IT and cybersecurity solutions to these RIAs. And, the message that I feel like, it really resonates with the listener is, why your RIA is just not another small or mid-sized business when it comes to cybersecurity and IT compliance. And you and I have talked about this, and I'm sure the listener knows this. You might be 5 people, 15, 25, right? I mean, typical RIA is going to have, anything of that number right there. So realistically, you're really a small business, but you've got a lot of money, a lot of assets under management. And sometimes it's not that the local IT provider doesn't know that security is important. They just don't realize how exponentially it's more important for you. And you at 5 people, 10 employees are fundamentally different than that business down the street at 5 employees, 10 employees. And it's just hard to impress upon that. And I think there's just a huge disconnect. And the analogy I use, it's kind of like this third secret language that we're able to speak with the RIAs. They get it, we get it. And it's almost like, oh my goodness, we both speak that same language. And when I'm talking to sort of this generic IT provider, they don't get that, right?
Yeah.
And so a little bit, I could talk about the tech stack in detail, but I think the things that keep popping up again and again, and what keeps the listener up at night is cybersecurity, IT compliance, right? These are things that typically the CCO is responsible for, but they're not really trained on cybersecurity and IT compliance and things like that. And they don't have the skill set. And so they're responsible for something where they don't have a lot of skill or knowledge. So they have to rely on somebody else that's doing that. And, oh, hey, by the way, who's auditing the auditor, right? And so that's one of the things like, yeah, our IT guy has us covered. And the question is, really? And so anyways, we'll provide a checklist for the listener where they can go in and they can download that and get that. But just a little bit of background that I wanted to share with the listener.
That's fantastic. And by the way, I really wish you'd stop me when I said your name at the beginning. Kakish, I thought it was Kakish. So this is not the first time where I've had to be correct, and I feel like a jerk every time. So my sincerest apologies for mispronouncing your last name. It will not happen again. And when I record the intro, people have already heard it now. When I do the intro, they will have heard that I pronounce your name correctly. So I do apologize. I'm glad you really dove into the importance of cybersecurity and IT compliance because, as you alluded to there, because these firms are small, most RIA firms are small, they don't have an IT staff, right? They most likely don't have a chief technology officer or chief information officer at the firm, right? They may have a chief compliance officer in-house, or they may be using an outsourced provider. But it's very uncommon until you get to a certain size for you to have, right, that IT professional sitting in there and really thinking about this all the time. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of uniqueness to this business, and you and I have experienced it many times over the years, where somebody who's brand new to financial services, either as a vendor or whatever, really starts having their brain kind of feel a little cloudy because they're like, oh my God, there's so many acronyms. They don't understand the compliance challenges that happen. They don't understand how the business works. And so it's really important to have somebody who knows what they're doing when it comes to addressing these issues, excuse me. So let's dive into the cybersecurity stuff head on for RIAs. I mean, I don't want to offend our audience, but I have a feeling most RIAs or solo or teams spend relatively little time thinking about or planning for their cybersecurity needs. I have a feeling that it's more of a I check the box type of deal, right? So SEC or the state regulator, depending on how they're set up, says, hey, here's some things, and they're like, yep, good. I have passwords. My Wi-Fi has a password on it. Some of those types of things. Let's get it from the expert's perspective here. What do you recommend for solutions and processes for RIAs that they can implement with relative ease, I guess, to ensure that their business and their client accounts are secure, that cybersecurity is kind of rock solid?
That's a great question. And I'll start by, we created a 29-point checklist. We call it the RIA Cybersecurity Checklist. It's not gated, so somebody can go and just download the PDF and they can use that. So you can use that if you're the CCO, you can go and you can do that. You can give it to your IT provider. You can get that actually at RIA WorkSpace.com/podcast. You can go there. Again, you don't have to put in an email or anything like that. So right off the
And we'll
bat,
have that link. We'll get that link to the show notes, by the way, for anybody. Sorry to interrupt you. We'll have that link to the show notes. And if you're watching the video, you're probably seeing it right now. We'll have the overlay of running through that checklist.
Yeah, well, right off the bat, I just wanted to give that out there, right? Because, I'm paraphrasing, but Albert Einstein had a statement that, if you can't simplify it enough, you don't understand it, right? And what happens a lot of times is you're talking to an IT guy and you're dealing with somebody that has a little bit of what I would call technical arrogance. And what I mean by that is, yeah, he knows a lot more than you do in the space, but actually he doesn't know it well enough to simplify that enough for you. And the key is, when I go and see a doctor, the doctor does not make me feel like an idiot because I don't know what these things are. Yet in the space we're in, I think sometimes people just love to use technical jargon and acronyms and, I guess to make themselves feel better. So I'll try to use as little as that as possible as we can today and communicate that. But yeah, that checklist is fantastic because there's 29 points in there. You can go and say, yes, we're doing this. No, we're not doing that. And again, you can do it yourself or you can give it to your IT provider and they can take care of that for you. And, one of the things that I repeat time and time and again, and it's really simple, but I'm always amazed at how it gets missed, is just the simplicity of using what's called multi-factor authentication, right? So you put in a username, you put in a password, and then you want to get a text or you want to use like a authenticator app by Microsoft or Google or something like that. Hey, use that for your email. Use it for your web-based software applications. That is the least expensive way to maximize the security of your email, of these web-based applications. Not saying that there aren't many other things that you can do, but man, I don't know how that gets missed, and that isn't just for like administrator accounts and things like that. That should really be for every single person in the company when you do that. That's the least expensive way to do that. And so that's something that is simple. You don't need an IT person to do that. You could pause this program right now or you can go in later today and you can enable that, right? Or you can, send an email to your CCO or IT person and say, hey, I want to make sure we have that enabled for everybody. So that's one simple thing that, you can do right off the bat.
I think that's really smart. And there's so many simple things. Let's spend some time on the simple things and why they're important. Let's talk about the email first. And I'll give you an example. I believe it was Twitter, and hopefully Twitter's not going to be sending me cease and desist things after that. No, but there was a relatively famous thing where Twitter, and this might be like 8 years ago, so it's a while ago, but Twitter got hacked, like the actual corporate portion of Twitter. And you're thinking to yourself, this is a technology company with like really brilliant technology minds working there, right? You'd think they'd understand security. But the way that they were hacked was somebody basically got an email, got into somebody's Google email, their Gmail. And what we realize is that many of us use the same password over and over again at different places. So once I'm into an email, whether it's personal email or business email, chances are that password will work someplace else, right? And so they basically started accessing via Google Docs. They got in there and they got a lot of really sensitive information and so forth, and it caused quite a big stir. And you see, similar things happen with, open Wi-Fi's, right? Like you think you're being really secure at work, at the office, we're locked down. But if I drive by your house and your Wi-Fi is open and I can get on your Wi-Fi, I can get onto your computer and I can get a lot of interesting information, and you just left it wide open or you made the password really easy. And that's happened even with like CTOs, like people who are like really important, they forget to lock down a point of weakness at home. So some of these things are just, they're so easy to do. They don't cost a lot of money, right? But you have to make sure that you make it hard for somebody to get in.
Yeah. Well, to that point, I'll just share a funny story. I had a friend of mine, and I don't know why he would do this, but he would go around, right? And he worked in downtown Chicago. And so there was a lot of other Wi-Fi networks that were open. And just for fun, he would actually get on that Wi-Fi network and then, send a message or print on their own printer. Your Wi-Fi is open. You might want to secure that, right? So somebody goes up to their printer in their company. And so he used to do that for fun to help them secure that, so.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So a couple of things that you brought up. One is it's no longer the traditional office environment, especially, post pandemic, where you come into the office, you're behind a network firewall, and you've got all that security, right? I mean, most RIAs and financial advisors, even if you do have an office that's like that, you're working from home, you're working on the road, and things like that. And actually, most RIAs already have 2, 3, whatever, 5 people that are working remote full time.
Yeah.
And what you're seeing is a lot of people that are working in the office, in a coffee shop, in a hotel, and so on. And so how do you secure that, right? And one of the things you really want to think about, and I talk about, a firewall and antivirus is just not enough anymore, right? And so there's that next generation security wraparound that you can put around each one of these computers that basically maximizes the security. It's kind of like that next generation antivirus, that next generation firewall and intrusion prevention. And think of it as, the best way, and I don't want to get too much into it, it's kind of like a bubble that's sitting around your computer and you're working, and it really protects that, whether you're in the office, whether you're on the road, and things like that. And so commonly it's referred to as endpoint security. But that's something that you really want to think about and you really want to have in place, because again, the traditional office environment is just not what it is. And I'm not sure it'll ever go back to, what it was before.
Bring up a really good point about the fact that life has changed a lot since the dawn of the pandemic, right? Many advisors who operated in an office, some of them have given up the office entirely. You're like, hey, listen, I'm spending $3,000 a month on an office and I'm not there and I can work from home. Yeah, I'll just beef up my home office set up and allow my small team to also work from home. And maybe if we need to, we can get a WeWork conference room for a day or whatever if we need to be in person. But we don't have to spend again, $3,000 a month or whatever the heck they're paying every month. But if you were now going to be operating remotely in different places, there's some things you need to think about, right? So one of them that I and I'm sure this is on some of your checklist stuff, but is a VPN, right? They're not super expensive, right? To have a VPN, but it is important. Like I will not log in when we travel. Like I've got a VPN service that I use. It's on my phone. It's on my laptop. It's on my iPad. I will not connect to an open Wi-Fi without my VPN, right? Because whether it's at the hotel or at the airport or whatever, it's because it's like, well, I have no idea who's around here. So let's make sure. And this is one of those ones. I hate the scare segments you read in the news, but you read one of these, like people will set up a Wi-Fi and make it look like it says Starbucks on it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you'll connect to that Wi-Fi thinking you're connecting to Starbucks, and you're actually connecting to something completely different than what you thought it was, right? And I don't like to be overly paranoid, but mildly paranoid enough to like wearing a seatbelt.
Yeah, you're hitting on a couple of points, but yes, I mean, so with our clients, we have that next generation VPN that's built in, right? And so that computer, before it can connect, it needs to have encryption enabled on that. It needs to have patch updates. It needs to have an antivirus. We can set up a policy so that you cannot connect to an open Wi-Fi or public Wi-Fi. Something that you may want to consider is, again, if you're traveling a lot, is, maybe you hotspot, from your iPhone, right? And just better security. You don't have to get on Starbucks or this or that, right? But even then, the company could have a policy where you can't do that, so you can't connect to it in the first place, and you can do that. So there's a lot of what I would call next generation things that can be done. But to your point, if you don't have the next generation VPN built on your endpoint, at minimum, you want to have that VPN in place so that when you connect. But again, that's where we talk about endpoint security. Hey, let's have the security wraparound, because you don't want to do that. There's a lot I could talk about, but I'll pause and I'll come back to you.
No, that's perfectly fine. And I've mentioned this already. Like sometimes people's heads can spin when they think about this stuff, and it can be a little, call it anxiety inducing. Like anytime you're thinking about, I got this big project I have to do, things I need to improve in my business, it can make you a little nervous. It's kind of like the financial client, right? Your financial consumer is coming into the advisor's office or meeting with them over Zoom, and you start talking about all the things you want to do. The client can be feeling a little overwhelmed, right? When you're feeling, hey, we've done this before. We've navigated this path before. We've seen clients who look like you before. Here's the steps we're going to take. We've got this, right? I think the same is true here, right? If you don't have your cybersecurity just like nailed just yet, don't panic, right? There are firms like RIA WorkSpace that can help you with that. There are some basic, you've done the checklist, right? There's some basic things you can do that will allow you to feel better sleep at night factor and know that you're protecting your clients, because as we've seen in other industries, all it takes is one breach to really cause a lot of damage, right? To break trust. If you're a financial advisor, trust is the most important thing you have with your clients, right? And so in the event that something would happen where somebody would breach, get a social security number, do some identity theft of one of your clients or worse, that could really be very detrimental to your business in the long term, especially if they found out that's where they got the information from. So make sure that you're protected. I think one of the things that I imagine advisors are a bit apprehensive about is the potential for cost, right? And again, I don't want to offend our audience, but I know them well. Many RIAs, especially those who are operating a solo business, are often fairly frugal when it comes to their willingness to invest in their business. And I don't mean this as an offense, right? We spend a lot of time on this show talking about how many advisors, even in the RIA space, are operating in a mindset of, I have a practice, or I have a book of business that I run, right? And it's because they got started as a stockbroker, right? They basically owned a book of business. They have a list of clients, and it's almost like a job that they own. So they haven't spent much time thinking strategically like a business owner does. And so kind of that's what this show is for, like modernizing the financial advisory business. So I want to talk a little bit about, investing in scalable solutions and managing kind of from a true P&L mindset. What should an RIA expect to invest up front in this type of process? With very specific costs of packages or whatever that you offer, but what's a ballpark, whether it's percentage of revenue or whatever, and then kind of like what should they expect to spend on an ongoing basis, and then after that we can dive into ROI type stuff. What should they expect to invest in this process and make sure that the business is secure?
All right, sounds good. Well, I'm gonna take a little bit of time, and I'm gonna talk about a couple of things, because you asked a question with many subparts.
Yeah, I love it. That's good.
I think I think in this space, everybody's obsessed with ROI, right? Yeah. Which is great. I have a new acronym for the listener: RON. What's your return on negligence, right? And if you think about that is, and most RIAs are not. I mean, they're really trying to do something, and they're trying to protect their client data and things like that. But yeah, there is an element of, you don't want to be the weakest link. You don't want to be negligent. And there's some simple things you can do that can really, really, really improve your cybersecurity. And to your point, what's one thing that keeps an advisor or a CCO up at night, right? Cybersecurity is one of those things that's always in the back of their head, right? And I jokingly say it's kind of like exercise. We all know we need to do it, but are we doing it fully, or are we even doing it at all? And sometimes yes, sometimes no. And we're trying to make that whole process easy for that RIA firm to say, hey, let me have some of these, let me have this tech stack in place, or let me have some of these things in place so that we can maximize the security that we have. The preferred platform that we use, right, that we leverage, is a Microsoft 365 platform. Not saying that Google or the others are bad or anything like that. Everybody has a place and everybody has a role in that. But what we really like, and the platform that we leverage is powered by Microsoft, is there's some really, really, really advanced security things that we can do. And the analogy that I use is, it's kind of like a airplane. If you're not a pilot and you sit in the cockpit, you have no idea what all these gadgets are, right? A lot of times you don't need a better airplane. What you need is a better pilot. So you might already have a really good airplane. And I jokingly say, I think most RIAs have the right airplane. They're just not flying it. They're driving around in that airplane, right? Because they're not leveraging, all the things that could happen. And so when you talk about cost, you're like, well, you're already paying for these, a lot of advisors are using the Microsoft Office suite, right? Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, maybe Teams, things like that. So you're already paying for that. You're just not maximizing the security that you can get with that. So again, very few advisors know that you can do email archiving on the Microsoft platform. And actually, very few even IT providers know that, and that it's SEC compliant, right? Most are paying for a third-party tool like Smarsh or a Global Relay, and those are good, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of them are saying, you know what, if this is included and we can leverage that, why not?
Yeah,
go ahead and do that. And so the really big shift in the last couple of years has been that Microsoft's got a phenomenal Microsoft 365 or Office 365, as you may know it, has got a phenomenal platform where there's a lot of advanced security. The challenge is that CCO, the in-house IT guy, is not going to know how to set up some of these things that you're able to leverage. So, realistically, with the licensing and sort of with the one-stop shop, all-inclusive, I'll give you some round numbers. I mean, honestly, it can be anywhere from $100 to $200 per user per month, sort of all-inclusive, right? You get your cybersecurity, you get the platform, you get help desk, you get cloud and managed IT, you get IT compliance, right? That, so kind of like $100 is maybe on the lower end, $200 is maybe on the higher end. But I wanted to give the listener a range. Realistically, that's what you can expect, regardless of percentage of revenue or AUM or things like that. So just a realistic number. And again, that's sort of think of it as your iPhone, and that's sort of the base. And then you can have applications that run on that, right? There are pieces and do that. Again, you could do the same thing with Google and others. We just found that there's a lot more third-party integrations and a lot of advanced security features that we can leverage with the Microsoft platform.
So I'm glad we had this conversation because I just think it's so important in the advisor's mind. That cost is always something that makes them nervous, and they've probably seen numbers all over the place. But somewhere in the neighborhood, even if it's $200 a month per user to make sure that you're secure, $2,400 a year is not a lot of money, right? And if it helps you, as you said, protect against negligence, which I took business law. Negligence, right, is a reasonable person test, right? I hate when somebody pulls out what Webster's says, but when you think of negligence, it is a reasonable person should have known that this could happen, right? And a reasonable person should know that email can be hacked. We see it all the time. And so if you have not put in reasonable measures to avoid that from happening, could be in trouble. A reasonable person knows that somebody could access your Wi-Fi and get into files that they shouldn't have. And if those files have sensitive customer client data in them, it could be problematic for the client and for you. So if you fail that, right, you are negligent, right? And that opens you up to potential lawsuits, but also losing business, right? That's the immediate suck factor. It's just like losing your clients. So I'm glad you brought it. That is very, very approachable, I think, for every advisor out there. And I would say if it's not, you might want to think about beefing up your business because $200 a month isn't a lot.
Yeah, and it's more than just cybersecurity, right? It's your help desk, it's the platform, it's your file folder structure, it's sort of consolidating everything in one place. And a lot of, just to be fair, and Mike, you probably already know this, a lot of the smaller guys, the 1-2, independent guys, the brokers a lot of times are taking on the responsibility of making sure, so they'll charge a higher fee, but they're making sure that there's a security wrap around the endpoint protection and things like that. The big challenge that I see is once they become 5 or more employees and they want to go on their own, now all of a sudden they're responsible for their own IT, their cybersecurity, their IT compliance and things like that. And how do you do that? Right now, you're no longer, you've essentially outgrown your broker, right? Because, you can go on your own, but you're responsible for these pieces. So that's kind of where we see that. But a lot of times the 1 or 2 person advisor, their broker probably has some of those pieces covered. But again, it varies. But I'm just talking in general terms.
No, I'm glad you're bringing it in general, and it's kind of like financial advice, right? It's going to depend upon your individual situation and what your business looks like. In this case, when we're talking about the tech stack that's appropriate for you and the security measures that are that work best for you and your team. So totally get that. One of the things. We produce this show for Truelytics, and Truelytics is about helping RIA businesses and independent financial advisory businesses maximize the value of their business, right? Improve the value of their business. And and understand what contributes or takes away from the value of the business. And this is an example of that, right? Like having a tech stack in place that is manageable, that is secure, that is flexible, that other advisors or another potential acquisition team at some point in time could easily fold their tech stack into, really does improve the value of your business. And if you have something that's scattershot and all over the place and needs, oh, wow, this is going to need a lot of attention if I buy this business, it's going to be a problem, right? I wonder if we could switch gears a little bit, because you spend so much time in this space, and you've been doing this for a long time. I wonder if you have any thoughts on some other high impact technologies that advisors may consider adding to their business, because we're at the start of 2022, and it seems like, that's, again, it's a great time for people to think about, like, what should I invest in this year? What are some solutions that you recommend to RIAs and independent financial advisors to consider? Right? You're like, hey, if you haven't done this is something you should add, because it might not be something that everybody's using.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, and I might be preaching to the choir, but I think there's a segment of people that are out there that are still running what I would call an on-premise server. So they still have a server in their office, and they're running certain things on there, and it's fine. It does the job and things like that. Absolutely no reason to have that anymore. I mean, it's one of those things where you think a lot of people have already moved off of that, but I think you'd be surprised at how many people still are, have that server that's sitting in the office. And I think it's more of an emotional attachment more than anything else. You don't need that anymore. A piece of technology, and again, this is part of the Microsoft platform, so you don't have to pay extra for it, is single sign-on for web-based applications, right? Not to be confused with like a password manager, but let's just pretend you're using Redtail or Orion or, whatever. Take your pick of, whatever it is that you're using. One of the challenges is you hire Mary, right? And you need to set her up with 5 different web-based applications, a username and a password. And great, now Mary can go in, can access that. And, maybe she has like a way to remember those or, whatever. And that's fine. Now you let go, Mary's no longer working there, right? And you need to go back and you need to disable those 5-10 web-based accounts, right? And who knows, maybe you forgot about one, right? I mean, it happens a lot more than people would like to admit.
Yeah.
What's really nice with this platform, that's powered by Microsoft is you get, and again, there's other tools that are out there, but I'm referencing this one, is you get single sign-on for web-based applications. So Mike, you come here, you click in, and you're automatically logged into Redtail or Orion or, whatever it is. Mike, you no longer work for us. We disable it in one place. You no longer are able to access any of the other applications. And what's really nice is it's better productivity for you, Mike. And then it's better security, because on the back end, you alluded to this earlier, everybody's using the same username and password, but on the back end, we're not using the same username and password. We're using a much more complex password and a different password for each one of these web-based applications. So single sign-on for web-based applications is fantastic, because in the space we're in, there's a lot of people that are using that, but they're using what I would call sometimes consumer single sign-on, like what comes with Chrome. Yeah, it's okay. But man, if you could have you could centrally control that. So, as a CCO, you could manage all that. That's fantastic. So I know that's a little bit technical, but I just wanted to share that with the listener, because I think that really helps with the productivity and with the security.
I love that. I don't use a single sign-on thing. I maybe should look to see if I could do it for my stuff, because I have like a bajillion websites. So I may consider that. It would be nice, by the way. And is one of the banes of my existence. Like I'll talk about on the personal level. So we talk about like just from a pain in the butt on the Apple TV. Every so many weeks or months, it'll make me re-sign into Showtime or something like that. I'm like, why can't you just I sign into Apple once and you just remember it forever? Keep me signed in. It's the same TV. It's the same IP address, whatever. So I mean, and I use it's a point of frustration, but we've all had that in business too, right? Where you're like, I need to log in. Oh crap, I can't remember the password, or it's making me reset the password, or all these types of things, to your point. And it's just, how much time did I just waste there on this type of thing?
Yeah. Well, I want to add something, Mike. Very different than a password manager, right?
Yeah.
So single sign-on and password manager are two different things, and sometimes people confuse them, right? Two different things for two different reasons, and you probably want to have both.
Okay. Very, very good point. Let me shift to some of the fun technologies because I think these are important as well. And so we're talking all about, very security heavy here and kind of operational type stuff. But we're doing a podcast here and we're recording video. You sound fantastic, by the way. So one of the reasons why you sound fantastic, other than, you've got a great voice, is you're using good equipment. You're using a high quality microphone there, and I'm using a much more expensive solution than most advisors should ever have to think about. But I think this is important things, willingness to invest. As we're going more remote, consider buying a reasonably high quality microphone for each of your advisors, right? Because they're going to be on Zoom. You're going to be doing webinars. You might be recording your thoughts on what happened in the past quarter or whatever. Who knows? You might be doing a podcast or a video show, but invest in some higher quality, particularly audio. So important. There's nothing worse than it just sounds like crap, graininess, pops, whatever. So, what microphone are you using, by the way? There, it's a gorgeous one.
I think it's like a $60 microphone.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you. You can add it to the show notes. I mean, I'm not an audio guy like you, but I'm just using a pretty good $60 microphone. But I will say this, Mike, because you're a big fan of this, and we were chatting about this last time. I think podcasting for the financial advisor and the RIA is phenomenal. And
Agreed.
you don't have to be big. You don't have to make it big. It could be for your clients, potential clients, and it's just fantastic. And here's the deal, kind of like what you and I are doing. There's no reason why the advisor and they can have 2-3 people. Is ideal, where they can just kind of go back and forth, and they can share that with prospects, potential prospects, and things like that. Because again, you're not trying to become the number one show, right? It's a great lead generator. It's a great way to build trust. Mike, you know this better than I do, but I'm an avid podcast listener, and I can tell you, in my car, in the gym, during dead time, nobody has access to me like that when I'm actually listening to a podcast. And imagine you're in your prospect's ear, you're in your client's ear. It's really, really, really phenomenal. So I personally think every single advisor should do that. But hey, I'll leave that up to the advisor.
I'm going to piggyback on what you said. I 100% agree. So I think obviously one of the things that stops people from starting a podcast, right, is there's a little bit of apprehension, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Increasingly, it's really, really easy to be able to fire up and record something, right? There's a lot of solutions out there. We're using a solution called Riverside to record. It's one of the more premium solutions. You can do it via Zoom. You can do it most computers have the ability just to record, right? Click record on some of the free services. If you're using a Mac, you've got GarageBand, and I don't know what's on Microsoft, but there's probably something very similar you can record into. But one of the points you made, I think, is so apt. It's like, look, your clients and your prospects want to hear from you. Right. So they want to develop a relationship. They want to know you, like you, trust you. The other things they want to do is they want to have some familiarity with you. Right. They're like, I want to feel comfortable with you. That's why your social media profile is so important. I see you in my stream frequently, even if I'm already a client or I'm maybe eventually going to be a client. I see you frequently. And even if you're not talking about financial advice related stuff, I see Jim, I see Mike, I see David, who are in my feed, and I know they're an advisor. Right. And then occasionally you will talk about financial related stuff. So being familiar, but then lastly, it's developing the confidence that you are competent at what you do, right? So if I hear you talking about cybersecurity in your case, or an advisor talking about, hey, here's what's happening in the markets this week. It's really been interesting. Here's my take on it. Or if you work in the tech industry and you get stock options, here are some things you want to make sure you know. If I'm talking about some of those basic things, and we don't have to have an hour-long podcast, it can be 10 minutes or whatever, just hearing you talk about it. And as you said, you're in my earbuds, right? You're in my head, literally, while I'm walking around. It creates a connection, right? And in this industry specifically, not everybody you meet is in the market for your services right now. but just about all of them eventually will be, right? They will change jobs. They'll have a money in motion event. They'll sell a business. They'll get married. They'll get divorced. They'll have kids, whatever. That stuff will happen. So at some point in time, they will have a need for your services, and just being there. No, this is my pitch.
Well, Mike, I know, and that's okay. And I know we got off a little bit on a tangent, but I think it's an important one because again, I think a lot of famous podcasters out there, right? They're trying to monetize it, get advertising and this and that. For you as a financial advisor, that's not the route that you're going. Think of it as lead generation, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's really what it is, an effective lead generation. And it's a great no risk way. What you're doing is you're creating an environment that's safe for the buyer and for the seller to get together without any risk for either party, right? I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, right, you're listening to me, you're listening to Mike. If I was listening to your podcast, and again, you don't need thousands of downloads, you don't even need hundreds. If you get, 10, 20, 100 people to listen, how many of those would eventually convert, right?
That's
or
right.
how much would that help build trust? And so, plus it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot easier, in my opinion, than doing video and then writing, right? So you can put an outline together and you can put a framework, and you can kind of follow that every time you do a podcast. And kind of like, I mean, again, Mike, you're the expert here, but I love being a guest.
Well,
so,
one of the things a couple of things you said that are so important there. Number one, it is way easier than writing a blog post for most people, right? Writing it takes a lot of thought process. It takes a lot of editing and so forth. You could have a couple of bullet points you want to talk about, fire it up and go. And you, by the way, you will get better over time. You're going to suck at first, just so you know, you're not going to be that good. But the other thing with the small audience, I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of people get overly concerned about having a small audience. And here's the thing I would say is, like, if I told you, hey, David, I'm not sure what you're doing on Wednesday, but if you could come down to the Marriott, I've got one of their conference rooms there. It's going to be filled with 30 people who are from the RIA space. Would you mind coming and taking the stage and doing a little talk for half an hour? You'd be like, yeah, I'm there. It's going to be 30 people. It's amazing. Like, you filled a conference room with 30 RIAs. This is great. Well, it's the same thing with a podcast, right? People are taking time out of their day to listen to you. And if you're a financial advisor or whatever, if you're in this space, an RIA firm, and you have a niche or whatever, and you see these numbers, you're like, they're not randoms. It's not just Joe Schmo dog walker listening to your podcast because he thought it'd be entertaining. It's somebody who's probably in your target market, probably some of your clients, your referral partners, the people you're already on your email list, right? So it's okay that the audience isn't gigantic. You're not going to be a Joe Rogan or a Tim Ferriss or whoever, and that's all right. So I know we're getting close to the end of our time here together. I just wanted to, I thought of a fun way to kind of wrap this up because I'm really fascinated. You have been running RIA WorkSpace since 2007, according to LinkedIn, which is, congratulations. It's awesome. You've been doing this for a while. It's obviously very successful. You've probably had a pretty big impact, but you've also probably seen some things change over the years. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing like one or two success stories that you've seen over the years of a firm that decided to kind of take this more seriously and seen some good results. You don't have to name names, but like some of the interesting success stories you've seen over the years.
You know what? I feel, I feel it's like the story of my life all the time because again, we're in a very niche market, right? And not a lot of people know who we are, but once they do, it's like, oh my goodness, you're speaking my language. This is exactly what it is. And I mean, the simple success stories are people that are just, people that are just got different tools all over the place, and they're working with a local IT provider, and they're overwhelmed, and they're constantly paying money for more additional on-site visits, and just I call it the pain threshold theory, right? It's okay, but problems happen, and then it just keeps accumulating, and it's like one day that's just like it's the camel that it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? Yeah. And so we see that all the time, and when the pain is big enough, that's when people are ready to make a change. And it's just, accumulates and accumulates and accumulates. I think, the success stories that we see is people that are using a local IT provider, and they're using different systems, and they're paying for so many third-party tools. They come in, they're paying us whatever, $150 per user per month, all inclusive. And now they've got a phenomenal partner, a platform where all these things are running. and they sleep better at night knowing that we've got their cybersecurity covered. And the pain is gone, right? I mean, I think that's what happens, right? It's kind of like you've got this pain, and it's kind of like an aspirin pill, right? We're that aspirin pill, but they don't know that until they reach that point, or something happens, or they don't even know that we exist. So I feel like that's something that it happens all the time.
Yeah.
The other piece that I should say is, and I'm very proud of this, and I love what you do, and I love what we do, is again going back to what we had talked about in the beginning, which is I like to call the RIAs as sort of the small giants in the financial services space, right? This is not Schwab or Fidelity or Chase or whoever, right? Again, you're 5 people, you're 10, 25 people, and you're having a really, really big impact in the lives of your own clients. I know, with my own advisor, it makes all the difference in the world. I have zero interest in picking up the phone and talking to Schwab, but I want to talk to my financial advisor. So I think for me, I'm proud of the fact that we work with these small giants in the financial services space, because the financial advisor, sometimes you get caught up in the day-to-day activities and this and that. And I go, listen, at the end of the day, you really are having a really big impact in your own clients' lives. You may not feel like that sometimes, but you really are. And so that's one of the things that, I'm proud of that we work in this space, because I don't really like working with the really, really big guys, with thousands of them. And I've done that like earlier in my career. I think you did too. Yeah. But I love working with, again, small, mid-sized business, and the RIAs really embodies that for me.
I love it. I'm glad that that's your mission. Is so interesting. I remember hearing Jason Fried, who's one of the founders of Basecamp. It used to be called 37 Signals. I'm not sure if you are aware of them, but they're a technology company, and it's a very well-used project management type solution.
They're right here in Chicago, by the way. So not too far away from me.
And so if by the way, if you're a free book recommendation from Mike Langford, it's called Rework, a book by Jason Fried and his business partner there, David Heinemer Hansen. And the
fantastic book, Mike. Yeah,
it's
I just
amazing book.
That.
It is. Yeah. It was like one of my number one. The question of like, what's the one book you recommend the most? That is like literally in the top 5 books that I recommend to people. It's a quick read, great stuff. Anyway, he made the point of like focusing on the SMB, small medium business type of segment of like they have real needs. Right. And your price point can be exactly what you're talking about, a couple $100 a month or whatever. But when you're dealing with small business owners, man, you can just you're having a bigger impact than you might with a larger business, and they are much more grateful, loyal, and they're going to give you more feedback too on the solutions you have. So anyway, great way to kind of close it out there. Well,
yeah,
David,
he calls it the Fortune 5 million instead of the Fortune 500. Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad I didn't throw that was so funny. I'm glad you picked up what I was laying down here with this. Exactly. There's more customer potential. Exactly. And I'm a huge fan, just so you know, I'm a huge fan of avoiding going through procurement. Just because it's just the sales cycle of having to go through procurement and the enterprise sale can feel soul crushing at times, and it's very surprising, especially in our space. If you were trying to sell into a large enterprise in the wealth management space, you can find yourself, it can take 18 months just to get to the point where they're ready to make a decision because of all the hoops you have to go through. Yep. And then once you're in there, oftentimes you're in a pilot program for another 18 months. So it can feel really, really difficult, but going with the SMB is great. Well, David, this has been a fantastic conversation. We covered a whole bunch of ground as promised. A lot of value. Folks are going to want to follow up with you. RIAWorkspace.com is the website. We'll get the resources, the checklist linked up here. And we'll obviously, if you watch the video, you saw some screen captures too. Other places people can follow up with you if they want to stay connected and learn more.
Yeah. So I think the big message is just, you don't want to be that sitting duck, right? I mean, I think that's kind of what we talked about. We want the listener to be able to sleep better at night. The 2 tools that maybe I will leave with the listener that I think will be really, really helpful. One is, if you're using the Microsoft platform, you can just go to security.microsoft.com without the www. So just go to security.microsoft.com. And right there, you can actually get your security score. And so you can give it to your IT provider and say, hey, I got the score. Let's improve this, right? You can go there. And again, we created a link where you can actually get this checklist, and you don't have to put in your email or anything like that. You can download the PDF, at riaworkspace.com/podcast, right? We just kept it simple so you can go and you can get there. And then, to get in touch with me, just go to riaworkspace.com and click contact us or get a quote, and then, they'll put you through in touch with me. But my goal is to help you, whether or not you ever reach out to us, because, we want you to sleep better at night. We don't want you to be a sitting duck, and we know a lot in this space, and hopefully some of the tips and tricks we shared could be implemented rather quickly.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, David. Great having you on the show.
Good talking to you. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much for listening to and or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. Huge props to my man, David Kakish, for joining us. I learned a ton. Also feel really kind of empowered on this end, right? In terms of my comfort level with some of the technology solutions as it relates to cybersecurity. Really, really good stuff. We'll make sure we have that that checklist there, the document that David mentioned, linked up in the show notes. So again, head over to blog.truelytics.com. You'll find this episode. That will be linked up there. So you can just go ahead and download it. It'd be awesome, awesome stuff. Okay, that's it from me today. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Please do make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform and reach out if you have a question or suggestion for the show, as I mentioned. And hey, you know what? Be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. See ya. Bye.